1. This happened to my boss a few days ago, and she is still shaken from her experience. I am a dog groomer in a very small salon. A regular client dropped off her dogs and left, saying to call her when they're ready. A couple hours later, she wandered back into the salon looking kind of dazed and disheveled. Now, this is a very dignified, wealthy older woman, always carried herself rather proudly, always dressed to the nines. She was stumbling slightly and mumbling something, and we were finally able to make out that she felt dizzy and unwell. We knew that she was a widow because we also knew her husband before he died. But we asked her if there was anyone we could call. She said no family or friends, or even neighbors she was close enough to. We got her to the hospital, and turned out she had a stroke, which was what we had suspected. So now the problem is, she's in the hospital and we have her dogs, and there's absolutely no one to come and get them, no one who can keep them. After closing, my boss goes to the hospital to see what can be done, and she offered to stay at the woman's house for the night with her pets and take them to the kennel the following morning. She gratefully accepted and handed over her keys, asking for a few things to be picked up from her house and brought to her in the hospital. My boss says no problem and heads out to her house. When I say wealthy, I mean loaded. This woman lives in one of the richest neighborhoods in the country, out in a gated community on a lake 10 miles from town. She arrives, gets the dog settled, packs a bag, and takes it back to the hospital. The woman is trying to tell her that if she hears noises not to worry, it's just her husband. My boss doesn't pay much attention, just assumes she's rambling because she clearly isn't well and isn't in her right mind. Until, that is, she's halfway back to the house, and she realizes that this woman is a widow because her husband shot and killed himself a couple years previously. In that house. We knew about the suicide, obviously, it wasn't a secret. It just hadn't occurred to her until then that he did, in fact, kill himself in the house that she's staying in. She shakes off the spooks and tells herself to stop being ridiculous. She gets back pretty late and goes to bed in the downstairs guest room she was told to stay in. She wakes up in the early hours of the morning to hear the door to the finished basement open. The husband had his workshop down there, and it's also where he took his own life. The larger dog is in bed with her and perks up, then jumps out of bed and goes trotting happily towards the kitchen. She's laying there terrified, and hears a low male voice murmuring something to the dog. Then footsteps coming towards the bedroom. They stop in the doorway, and there's a long silence. Then they move away and head upstairs. They walk around upstairs for a while, then back downstairs with the dog following them the whole time. Then the door to the basement closes again, and the dog comes and gets back in bed with her. There was no one else in that house with her. She walked through it before she went to bed, not really snooping, just checking things out because it's a large, beautiful house, and she had carefully armed the state-of-the-art alarm system as soon as she re-entered the house earlier. She just laid there terrified until daylight, then packed up the dogs and GTFO'd, preferring to wait in the parking lot of the kenneling facility until they opened. She's obviously traumatized and confused because she's on the fence about the paranormal, but has no other explanation for what happened. I believe every word she said. Update. Miss B is out of the hospital and back home with her pets as of yesterday. Turns out she does in fact have 2 daughters in Minnesota. They've apparently been estranged for 2 or 3 years, but when they got word of their mother's health problems, one of them was able to catch a flight down. We live in Tennessee. She came in today to thank us for our help and to offer my boss money for staying the night with the dogs, which she declined. There's no way she would accept money for helping someone out. When she came in, we were a bit surprised because Miss B had said she had no family or close friends she could call for help. And she also never asked my boss to contact anyone for her. I guess we had assumed she didn't have any kids. But when the hospital asked about next of kin, they were then contacted by the hospital. Her daughter, when she came in, mentioned offhand that she nor her sister had seen or spoken to their mother in a few years until now, like it was no big deal. I was shocked that she was so casual about it. I talk to my mom almost every day. We can't be certain, of course, but we think the estrangement has something to do with her dad's suicide. Just seems coincidental that's about the same time period that he shot himself 2 to 3 years ago. hopefully know now that their mother needs a bit of caring for, they can mend fences. 2. To provide context, I've had encounters with the paranormal in the past. From a young age, I've been told countless stories about how I talked to family members who had passed before I was even born. While I have a lot to share, this post is focusing on shadow people. I don't know what else to call them. My first encounter with them was when I was around 5. I lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment complex at the time, with a small balcony by the living room. I was alone, playing in a room in the complete opposite direction of the living room, far away from the balcony. I remember seeing the shadow of a man and following it, telling my mom that he was walking towards the kitchen and disappeared. That was the last I saw of him. It was a while until I had another encounter. We moved states and moved into the current house we live in today. Since moving there in early 2006, I've had numerous experiences with the paranormal. And it had come to the point where I had to sleep on the floor of my parents' room because I felt watched in my room past 12 a.m. I was 10. Sleeping in my parents' room again, I woke up around 4 in the morning, feeling as if someone was watching me. The door was open, so I looked outside and saw a figure from the stairs, standing behind the railing. Somehow it was darker than any sort of shadows, but I couldn't make out any features besides its general humanoid shape. It looked like its hands were wrapped around the bars under the railing of our stairs. Even though I couldn't see a face, I felt like it was staring straight at me. I stopped sleeping with the door open since that night. My latest encounter was a few weeks ago. For a little backstory, our house caught on fire and we were relocated to a hotel for months. I eventually left home for college, still living at the hotel, before I could even move back in. My parents moved back in around September, living there without me. When I came home again, I asked them if they had experienced anything, and my mom told me that the house seemed to have calmed down. Fast forward to the night after that conversation. I was on the stairs talking to my mom during the night. She was standing outside the bathroom, which was separated by a wall from their bedroom. Their door was open and the lights were off. And as we were speaking, I saw a black shadow peep in and out of view, sort of like the way you would look out from a door, trying to catch a quick peek of something. We tried to recreate any sort of movement to replicate the shadow, but it was impossible that it could have been her shadow. I have a gut feeling it was the same being I saw when I was 10, which was 9 years ago. It felt familiar, almost. I don't know why, but I'm the only one in the house that's encountered it so far. It feels like it knows when I'm back, and only appears around then. I don't really know what to do anymore. I go home in a few days, and I'm not ready to deal with him again. We've blessed the house with 3 different Catholic priests, doused every room with holy water more times than I can count on my hands, and even burnt sage. They still won't go away. 3. I live with my mom and cats in a 2-story plus basement home, which we just recently moved into within the last month. Before this, we were living in a basement apartment, as it helped us get back onto our feet over the last year after some pretty heavy stuff in the family. In most of the houses I lived in growing up, strange things happened in the majority of them. For example, a basketball randomly bouncing in my hallway in the early hours of the morning. But something about that basement apartment just kind of halted all the strange activity happening at home. And this is when I started becoming more aware of the shadows, cold spots, and more at my girlfriend's house. I'm saying that now in my new living situation, it seems that for some unknown reason, whatever has been following me around is back in full action. I'll list some of my experiences to make it easier to follow. Cupboards open here on their own, literally. You can shut them and leave the room for 30 seconds and they'll be open when you come back. My oven and stove light turn on by themselves all the time. I have a small fan in my nightstand that turns on by itself. The door to the basement will be closed in the morning, despite my mother and I never doing that, as the cats need access to their litter boxes down there. I am usually up later than my mom, so she will check the locks in the front and back door, and then I will double check when I go to bed to make sure they are locked, just for both of them to be unlocked in the morning. Things go missing and reappear suddenly. For example, my mom has 2 Christmas ornaments that she absolutely loves. While we were decorating the tree this year, she hung the first one, and the second one was nowhere to be found. When we both started looking for it, we were on the last bag of tree decorations that we store in clear plastic bags. She and I both looked for it in this bag when there were about 10 ornaments left in the bag, not an overwhelming amount of them or anything. Yet we both couldn't find it. After I explained the story to my girlfriend after she came over that night, I picked up the bag and sure enough, the ornament was in there. What has really started to startle me, though, is 2 things that have happened to me within the last week or so. I was walking up the stairs to go to bed last week, and something tugged on the back of my shirt, almost causing me to fall down the stairs. Then, just 2 nights ago, I was laying on my phone playing some dumb games to try and sleep, and then all of a sudden I just became completely still. I don't know what was getting into me. I just had this overwhelming anxious and fearful feeling. After about 30 seconds, I started feeling cold breaths on the back of my neck. I started to completely freak out at this point and just stayed still for about 5 minutes, until suddenly, the breathing stopped, and all my negative feelings vanished like they were never there. Does anyone have any idea what this could be? Why would the activity stop at that particular house? And why is it back so strong in this new one? Was my girlfriend's house just somewhere it could target me while I was living in the basement apartment? I really don't know. Please leave some feedback if you can. I am starting to feel like I may be in some sort of danger. 4. So this all started 2 nights ago, if I count the first night. I was going to sleep earlier. A thing that I don't do really often. I think it was around midnight when I fell asleep, and I woke up around 2 a.m. shaking like freaky. Also, I was terrified for no apparent reason and hungry, which didn't make sense because I took dinner at 11 p.m. My throat was thirsty like hell for no apparent reason either. I let it all pass, and it was suddenly morning, so I just stand awake until 2 p.m., when I decided to sleep a little. But the true story comes today, aka Monday dawn. As the day before, I went to sleep earlier, around midnight too. I had a dream about a relative of mine, specifically my cousin, that is going to move to another house. For some reason, we were in the street of my house walking back and forth. This was the beginning, and nothing special has happened at all, except for saying that it was 2 a.m. and I needed to sleep. Keep that in mind. Second part of the nightmare. A quick explanation. Some years ago, I lived in a farm. In the house, we had 3 rooms, and the last room, that was meant to be mine, always scared the crap out of me. I used to think that there would be a shadow coming out and somebody attacking me or something. That's what the nightmare was about. This nightmare had something about my self-esteem, because I couldn't fix my hair or my clothes in the nightmare. The horrifying part is that I needed to get to the room, but I didn't want to, so a bunch of people that I didn't recognize pushed me to go there, where I was caught by the shadow. Then I woke up, same as the day before, shaking, terrified, hungry and thirsty. And as the day before, 2 a.m., like I said in the dream as well. So I waited an hour to come back to sleep, because I needed to sleep for the classes that I would have. Yes, I'm not on vacation. When I slept, I had another nightmare. This was simpler than the other. I was in a big house which I didn't recognize, and I had a brother. In real life, I don't have a brother, but I was meant to have 2. Sadly, they died before being born. This was before I was born. Coming back to the nightmare, and you have me and my brother fighting for something, and I can't remember what it is, but this was important. The second nightmare also had a shadow, but I can't remember why. I woke up, and I was terrified. I was fucking mentally destroyed. I almost ran to my mother to wake her up and tell her that something was not okay. I was shaking more violently, my throat was hurting because I was so thirsty, and I was hungry as never before, even though I ate and drank water when I woke up at 2 a.m. My mother put my mattress in the living room where she slept because it's colder than other places in the house. So, this was the end of the nightmares because I don't sleep. By the time I finish this, it's 5:15 a.m. It has been an hour since I woke up for the second time. Even though now I am with my mother and my cat in a lighter room, I can't sleep. I don't feel safe at all. I am truly scared as I never was in my life. I'm not the kind of person who watches a horror movie and can't sleep, and even if I was, I didn't watch any horror movies recently. I just wanted to know what you guys think about all this. 5. This story may not sound paranormal, but it felt like it. I guess it would be easy enough to chalk it up to a run-in with a common thug or just a guy that needs a ride. However, I think there may be a little more to it. This incident crossed my mind because it's a dark, rainy night. It's just like the night that the incident took place. It was a few years back. I believe it was mid-fall. It was around 10 p.m. I am normally a vigilant, mindful individual, but not that night. I don't know why I was being so complacent. Maybe I had a long day, or maybe I was just in a good mood. Either way, I was actively breaking one of my #1 security rules. I had the living room curtains wide open, and every light in the room was on, so we couldn't see a thing outside. But anyone outside could see us as plain as day. Even worse than that, I was doing something on the desktop computer with my back turned to the windows. As my wife and I enjoyed our quiet evening, we were interrupted by a knock at the door. 3 taps. Then nothing else. I was usually weary about opening the door after dark, so I proceeded accordingly. I opened my pocket knife, which I always have clipped in my waistband, with my left hand, and I cautiously unlatched the deadbolt and turned the doorknob with my right. I assured that the chain lock was still fastened before cracking the door. When I peeked through the partially open door, I found myself face to face with him. When I say face to face, I mean it. He was literally a few inches from mine. But this is when it gets strange. I could tell he was wearing a black hood, but I swear I couldn't make out a single detail of his face. It was like the universe itself had censored the details of his face. It wasn't covered. I just couldn't see it. I don't know how else to explain. The second I saw the individual, my blood ran cold. It was that sort of primal fear that lets you know that you are seconds from death if you don't make the right decision. Then he spoke. "Can I have a ride?" His words sounded hollow and far away. He spoke in the same weak voice that people do in their deathbed. Every neuron in my body fired at once. I was positive that I was in mortal danger. I replied in a pitiful voice, "No, thank you," and I slammed the door shut with intent. From the other side of the door, I heard the most fiendish cackling. The feeling I felt must be the same as a rabbit gets when he hears the screech of an owl. I was certain that I was still in danger. Without saying a word to my wife, I dashed down the hall, flung open my closet, and took my shotgun in hand. I broke it open and loaded a round of buckshot into the chamber. As I re-entered the living room, my wife, pointing out the still open window, informed me that he had taken off on my bicycle. Still shaking, I tactfully opened the door and entered the front porch. I confirmed that the man did steal my bike, but at least he was gone. Allow me to explain why the man seems more significant than an average thief. Even though I stood face to face with him, I have no idea what he looked like. I couldn't even tell you what race he was, and the way he spoke, it was like the absence of an accent. He sounded like an anime villain. You know, cooler than a cucumber, even though he's a savage killer. And I've had plenty of run-ins with thugs, junkies, drug dealers, and other degenerates. None have ever made me feel the way he did. I typically refuse to fear another grown man. It's unbecoming. I'll go as far as to say that the fear I felt is at least on par with any feelings I had in OEF. It may have been even more intense. And the way he laughed, I will always remember that laugh. I can't prove it, but I swear that guy was different than any man I've ever met. He was evil. When it was all said and done, I did the only thing in my power. I chanted a Buddhist prayer. I must have chanted and prayed for an hour that night. I wasn't even that religious at the time. I typically reserved chanting and prayer for meetings with my like-minded friends. I was more about the doctrine than the rituals. But that night it's all I wanted to do, so I did. I guess it's because I felt otherwise powerless. I didn't have the balls to chase him, and I reported it to the sheriff's department, but I knew they wouldn't do anything but take note of it. So as I said, I chanted and prayed. It just felt right. I don't know what would have happened if I had entertained his request that night. I don't like thinking about it. My wife and kids were home that rainy night. If that man or thing was bad enough to make me feel like that, then I know it would have been bad. If I had opened the door, it may have been the worst, and the last mistake I ever made. I don't know what you might make of this story, and I know how stupid it sounds. But thanks for listening. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 174. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. And keeping me company as I edit tonight, I'm watching the TV version of What We Do in the Shadows. It's up on the BBC iPlayer in the UK. I've seen it before, but it's worth a watch again. And now, hopefully, as you guys get this, I will be beginning work, beginning work on the following week's videos, because that's a week I'll be taking a little rest and just to make up for the half a holiday I got because I was feeling a bit poorly. So far, so good. It's Tuesday and I'm already recording Friday's video. I'd usually get that done on Wednesday, so we're a bit ahead already. So far, so good. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.